Good evening, Swiss Jam members and friends. Pleasure to see you all today for this webinar. Dear guests of other chambers, in particular guests from the Italian Chamber, American Chamber, and also Eurochamber. Hi everyone, welcome. Thank you for joining us tonight for this third and final session of our trilogy of webinars on the new reality of travel. I'm happy to see that we have again a large audience tonight from all around the world, from countries, Singapore, Hong Kong, even Indonesia, I see on the list, Philippines, Switzerland, and Italy. When we initially started to discuss this initiative within the board of the Swiss Jam at the end of 2020, we were aware of the complexity of this topic. However, we were hopeful that the situation would return to normal in the near future. Evidently, this was not the case. And today, unfortunately, we see how challenging living within the parameters of the new normal can be. It has affected every person, every industry, and every individual in our daily lives. With the constant shift in global policies, and with more and more countries entering and extending their lockdown policies on a daily basis, it is difficult to imagine what the next steps in the travel and hospitality industry might be, as we are still facing this unprecedented global state of emergency. Tonight's webinar explores strategic shifts in the industry and how businesses are pivoting to accommodate for these sudden changes, how companies are keeping customers interested and engaged despite their lack of mobility and inability to travel, but also how hybrid workspaces, mobile offices, and home offices are pushing companies to reimagine typical workspaces and workplace interactions. How the whole industry adapts in order not to fall behind in a time where the resilience of travel and hospitality are especially being tested. We are very privileged to have again 4 experts on our panel tonight, from the hospitality, tourism, real estate, and technology sector. And those experts will share with us tonight first-hand insights into the latest developments across the various stakeholders of the new travel ecosystem. As for the first 2 sessions, we are grateful to have again Mira as our moderator for today's webinar. She's with Accenture in Singapore and has led multiple product development, innovation, digital blueprint, and government programs for the aviation, travel, and transportation industries. Outside her job, Mira is the co-founder of She Says in Singapore, championing for diversity and providing women with the network and support to grow. Lastly, on behalf of the board of the Swiss Chamber of Commerce in Singapore, I would like to thank our esteemed industry experts in the panel, as well as our moderator, for taking the time and share their insights into the new reality of travel. With this, I'm handing over to our moderator, Mira. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Hi, I'm Mira, and thank you for attending today's third webinar in our series with the Swiss Cham. The focus for today, as Chris mentioned, is really going to be around the future of travel in relation to the future of work. As for many of us who are based in Singapore, you'll see that the government recently announced the lift of measures around the return to the office space, which has been greeted with some positivity and some preferences to work from home. But what we're also starting to see is a shift in the future of business travel, as well as the way that people are moving and working, and a new type of work, which is work environment, which is a hybrid work environment. So we're very excited today to have our speakers from the Four Seasons, Zoom, the Working Capital, as well as the Swiss Tourism, be a part of our conversation today to understand what the future of work and travel is going to look like. Before we get into our panel session, we are privileged to have Raina Stanfa, who's the President for Hotel Operations Asia Pacific, the Four Seasons Hotel and Resorts. A graduate from the University of Applied Sciences in Munich, Raina holds a bachelor's degree in business management and tourism. And in 2001, he joined the Four Seasons as a food and beverage director at the Boston property. Since then, he's had a post as a hotel manager at the Four Seasons Hotel in LA in the Beverly Hills area. And he returns to Asia to assume his first GM role in Koh Samui, and is now living in Singapore and leading the company's hotel operations as president for Asia Pacific. So to kick off our session for today, we'll have a brief introduction by Raina on the Four Seasons.
Mira, thank you for the kind introduction. Thank you, Chris, and to the Swiss Chamber for allowing me a few minutes prior to our panel discussion and the new reality of travel. And clearly, as Chris was just referencing, if there is any industry that has been hit, or among those the worst hit, is certainly hospitality and tourism. We're in the eye of the storm, but I appreciate, and I thought before we get onto the topic, the opportunity to briefly introduce Four Seasons to you, being unaware to what extent the audience here is familiar with our organization. Actually, just this last weekend, we celebrated our 60th birthday virtually, of course, with our founder and still chairman, Isidore Sharp, in 1961, not with the idea to create a global hospitality company, but he started a first hotel in Toronto. We're still a Canadian company. From there, as you see here on the timeline, I thought I'd just give you some insights as to how we developed 1970, our first hotel outside of North America, with London, a hotel that we're still operating today. Fast forward to 1985, we went from only operating hotels to also managing private residences and to extend the Four Seasons lifestyle into personal homes. That was at that time in Boston. And in 1992, given we're in Asia, we entered the region with our first hotel here in Tokyo. In 2007, so in the meantime, we were listed at the New York and Toronto Stock Exchange in 2007. We were taken private with Mr. Sharp still retaining a part ownership, but the majority owners to equal terms being Bill Gates with his private fund Cascade, as well as Prince Al-Walid and Saudi Arabia through his Kingdom Holdings. In 2015, after hotels and resorts, we ventured into the private jet business, a line of business that has proven particularly successful for us, where we have a custom-built jet for 58 customers at a time that we typically take on journeys of around about 3 weeks at a time to largely Four Seasons destinations around the world. And we do 6-7 trips under normal circumstances, not over the last 12, 15 months, but under normal circumstances. And again, that has become a very essential part of our product offerings. Today, we're managing 119 hotels and resorts around the globe, 44 residences, in addition to those in 47 countries around the globe. And our pipeline includes well over 50 projects around the world. The purpose as we operate, and again, being in hospitality and by natural extension in caring for people, is really creating impressions that we would like to stay with our customers for a lifetime, as we truly and sincerely believe that life is richer when we connect with people in the world around us. And we've heard a lot about our belief in recent months, and I want to believe that all of you on the call would agree that through COVID and what we've experienced in the last years, that connectivity with people in the world around us has become, if anything, even more attractive than it was already prior. If we move to the next slide, please. So here, just really briefly, given once more, we're here Singapore based, our headquarters for Asia Pacific. Here, a brief overview of our 28 hotels that we're currently operating in the region, along with 7 private residences. And as mentioned, as part of the pipeline, 13 of these developments under construction are once more here in Asia and the Pacific, including Australia. And 7 of those developments include private residences, just again to give you a bit of an idea of where you could find us relatively near to your home. With COVID, and moving on to the next slide, of course, please do interrupt me with any questions that you may have, but no one saw it coming, and certainly I didn't when we were hit with the first cases in the beginning of last year. Won't spend much time on the fact that, as everyone is vividly aware, this all started in our part of the world. In the meantime, almost 125 million cases globally, commercial flights being down by over 60%. In fact, all destinations literally around the globe are affected as far as travel restrictions are concerned. Currently still, international tourist arrivals are down by over 60%. That, depending on the country that you're in, may seem a relatively low number, as again we've all seen and experienced in some countries. There literally is no international travel at this point whatsoever. Unfortunately, many in our industry have lost their jobs over the last 12 months, and by projections, most recently from Bloomberg, well over 100 million jobs in tourism are at risk. Leading into the reality of travel, and with that, the reality of hospitality, I thought I'd provide you here just briefly with really a high-level overview of what did we do at Four Seasons as we were hit by the pandemic. And needless to say, as in many businesses, the health and safety, particularly in hospitality and hotels, in restaurants, the health and safety of our customer, of our patrons, needless to say, was and continues to be our absolute priority. To that extent, we've taken great measures to ensure our hotels, our restaurants are safe, but we've been guided, we engaged very early on last year by May with Johns Hopkins Medicine International in a consulting agreement. They have worked with us through verifying our measures wherever we needed information, be it for guests, be it for our teams, be it for how we go about servicing guests. We've very closely interacted with them and their leading epidemiologists. And we titled that Lead with Care at Four Seasons. And that is something that we have found to be absolutely essential to our success. Needless to say, like all of us, we needed to be very agile. We had to look at our product selections very quickly. In some instances, supply chains were disrupted. We needed to run our hotels a little differently as far as masks and sanitizers and any products that are related. Once more, again, primarily to keep our customer safe. But at the same time, we wanted to make sure that a Four Seasons, that it may look differently, but that it still feels like an experience that as a customer, one can look forward to, and hence a great focus needed to be placed on how do we adjust our processes, how do we remotely communicate with customers, service customers, ensure distancing, in line with the various restrictions in different countries, and again, by what we were guided with in terms of what we just considered safe. You can imagine that the circumstances there from country to country, and here within Asia Pacific, we're operating in 14 countries, differed and continue to differ greatly from operation to operation. With that, we very quickly engaged our team globally and wanted to make sure that we, if you will, manage by control in aspects, again, of safety and areas where we felt nothing can fall through the cracks, and we need to make sure, as you would in a crisis, that we're very tightly guiding our 50,000 plus employees around the globe, but at the same time to act in a very, very local context, markets, the specific strategies, the segmentation, the pricing, sales and communication, just a few aspects here, but again, through most of 2020, but certainly right now, we see that the phases of reopening, that the recovery looks very, very different in almost any of the countries that we operate in. You hear and are familiar with the different phases in the different countries, certain communication around travel bubbles, which for the most part to this point didn't end up in actually becoming a working tool. But we know, and we closely work with governments as well, that particularly behind the scenes, there's a lot of work happening, and that many governments in many countries are very eager to support, obviously, the tourism industry, which you can imagine the case of Thailand and a number of other countries is very, very significant part of the GOP. And so border openings and for us to operate is very essential. As we go to the next slide, I wanted to highlight, and that really leads us a bit more into the topic of today's discussion and the trends that we've seen through COVID and the priorities that we have identified in the industry, but for Four Seasons as we relevantly work through 2021, and we anticipate that even well into 2022, we will in one way or another be occupied with COVID-related matters. We have seen, and again, I'm sure many in the audience are well aware and look forward to travel themselves again, but a very strong pent-up demand in countries where travel is feasible. China has recovered very, very strongly. We saw a little dip now over Chinese New Year, but booking pace since has picked up very strongly, particularly in southern China. We in some instances see record results, which feels a bit strange when you're in certain countries in Southeast Asia and many other parts around the world, but China can function very well domestically. In India, we saw certain recovery to that extent, Australia, but then for the most part in Asia Pacific and in many other countries around the world, clearly domestic business doesn't suffice. Once more, we have plenty of evidence today that, and again, that did not come as a surprise, that leisure business returns prior to corporate travel. There is that interest in getting out. It's typically out of the traveler's own pocket. But we also see as a trend what we would term as pleasure, combining business with leisure. Once you're out there, to see how you perhaps can add a couple of days, greater length of stay when people travel, and to see just how they make this a multi-purpose trip. Great flexibility has been necessary across the industry there. Book now, decide later. Booking patterns have changed. Booking windows are a lot shorter than they were ever prior. And needless to say, we had to become extremely flexible in allowing for cancellations in many instances up until the day before, and in some occasions even on the day of arrival. Other than that, I would say that a lot of the trends were really in place pre-COVID, but clearly have been accelerated. Digitalization, first and foremost in our industry, key through the experience being the booking prior to a trip, communication through the whole customer experience, staying with us and even post a visit to be able to communicate. We've seen how fourseasons.com has been used more relevantly than ever, and particularly our Four Seasons app and Four Seasons chat have been essential in frankly tiding us through the last 12 months. Perhaps just to quickly give a bit of context of chat, it is in many countries been a preferred communication tool, whether you're at a Four Seasons at the hotel or not. You don't necessarily need to have a reservation for that purpose, but it allows you to directly communicate with our team members in the various hotels in well over 100 languages. And it's not a chatbot at the end of the other phone, but it is human interactions and individual staff members that respond there. Social media, again, strong trend as part of our marketing efforts prior, and that has only been strengthened. And of course, contact service, the idea about, I call it remote everything, be it a mobile key to open your door, be it a contactless checkout, be it ordering through QR code readers in restaurants, as I'm sure many of you do on a daily basis. The ordering in the restaurant, the focus on food and beverage is something that we've seen, particularly with the millennials, with a change in demand patterns, how increasingly important food and beverage has become as part of our offerings. We see more and more that the choice of restaurants and particularly bars, great renaissance around bars, particularly in Asia Pacific, but really globally, that the choice of food and beverage offerings that we have in our hotels is more and more a decision-making factor for whether individuals choose to stay with us or elsewhere. With that, and again, those of you that are familiar with the hospitality, traditionally, we have a greater share of income and profit on the rooms end of the business, but food and beverage obviously has to stand for itself. And so optimizing our performances while creating great value is absolutely critical. And we've seen in the recent 12 months, once more, not surprisingly, a great acceleration of our e-commerce efforts, e-retail, being able to order out to order in. Lastly, and again, part of the topic of today's discussion, ESG, but with that sustainability. So the environmental, social, and governance efforts, which once more were core and center to our efforts prior, and frankly was difficult to focus on particularly sustainability, environmental issues through the firefighting in 2020, but energy saving in our industry, great efforts around reducing food waste, single-use plastics, where we've made great progress, but we've also focused in recent, frankly, over the last 9 months for sure, around how we can support our employees with remote working, less opportunities to engage. How do we make sure that sense of inclusion, that sense of belonging stays there? How do we make sure our people don't work excessively? There was an interesting article that many of you may have read over the weekend in the Financial Times around the financial industries, but this is relevant in hospitality just as much. How do we ensure mental health and for people being supported and understanding how they can deal with these demands that have been put upon them through all the circumstances generated by this pandemic. So that really just very high level, a bit of an idea as to how we as Four Seasons have worked over the last 12 months and what's on our mind. And with that, I would hand the mic back to Mira. Thank you.
Thank you. That was really insightful. Thank you for walking us through that. So now we're going to move on to the panel discussion. In this webinar, we'll be taking a closer look at the new business travel paradigm and how the hospitality and tourism industries, like businesses like the Four Seasons, have pivoted into the new normal, how companies have achieved efficiency and can achieve efficiency in the new hybrid workplace model, but also is the increased awareness of sustainability and health impacting the hospitality, tourism, and real estate industries in a different way. So we're happy to have today the following speakers. And just to follow up with some brief introductions, we've got Ivan, who is the Director of Southeast Asia for Switzerland Tourism, having started operations in the region from scratch. He's based in Singapore and manages teams in Singapore, Jakarta, Bangkok, Kuala Lumpur to increase the overnights in Switzerland from the area. He's held different management positions for Switzerland Tourism in Zurich, Toronto, and Brussels, and recently graduated with an executive MBA from IMD. We also have Raghulam Pati, who's the head of enterprise of APAC at Zoom. Raghulam is the head of enterprise and is based in Singapore. His responsibilities include go-to-market strategy, sales, and representing Zoom in APAC region. He brings over a decade of business and sales leadership experience within cloud and technology, and has held senior business roles at some of my favorite brands, Facebook, Amazon Web Services, and is also the co-founder of a cloud software company. We then also have Royston To, who is the CEO at the Working Capital. He has over 15 years of real estate experience in the developer and consulting business and oversees TWC's asset management function and the operating platform. Prior to TWC, he was in charge of CBRE Asia Pacific project management consulting business and was also instrumental in leading the commercial CRM pursuits and account management platform. And most recently, he was with CapitaLand as the general director and board member of CapitaLand project companies and had overall asset management, financial and operational responsibilities for CapitaLand's real estate development projects in Vietnam. So to kick off our conversation for today, and just for everyone who has joined us, the way that we traditionally conduct our sessions with the Swiss Chime series is that it's going to run as a conversation, where we'll be able to share, we'll ask some questions of the speaker, but if you look down into the chat boxes or the bar at the bottom of your Zoom screen, you'll see a Q&A button. If there are any questions that you have, or that you would like to pose to all or a specific one of our speakers, do be sure to pop those questions into the Q&A and we'll be sure to address them. So maybe if we wanted to kick off with Raina as well as Ivan, in terms of what Raina had just talked about, around the trends that are being seen in the business tourism industry. Raina, when it comes to, you mentioned just now about new services and new products that have been introduced by the Four Seasons. Can you walk us through some of the new services and requests that have been coming through from the customer, and how did that influence the chatbot and these new digital services that the Four Seasons has introduced?
I'd happily give a little more time to Ivan here in a moment, and I think I've referenced some of the demands that we've seen here. Ultimately, what customers are looking for when they come to our hotels is really the same. They want to make sure it's safe. They want to make sure it's at their own terms, even more so than ever beforehand, and that we're truly able to assist them, particularly, and in some instances it does happen even today, that people travel across borders, at least to cities or places that they're less familiar with, that they know we're not going to be stuck. If anything happens, they can trust on us. So that personal interaction has become ever more important. The degree of flexibility required by our team members has become more important. And the ability to receive these services in many instances without having necessarily a direct human interactions have become absolutely critical. Again, as I alluded to, Four Seasons Chat has been huge in this context. You don't necessarily need to meet anybody. You don't need to even use the phone in your room, which, well, it gets properly sanitized, but not everybody necessarily may be comfortable with. Particularly in the early days when surface transmission, there was a lot of chat around that and not necessarily the clarity to the extent how relevant it is. And so our chat traffic, despite, you can imagine, again, when you looked at the earlier statistics and business being down in some instances by 60 and 70%, our chat usage has grown 4 times over what it was in 2019. And just that gives you a little bit of an idea as to how customers through this pandemic, but I think also importantly in the context, it's more the younger ones that travel first. We've seen that shift in demand. With that, slightly different behaviors and different interaction patterns, and that has really led to how we look after our customers today.
And Ivan, from a Swiss tourism perspective, especially with the businesses that you're engaging in, and it must be an interesting period, and I would love to actually hear your perspective of what you've seen from post-COVID till now within your role and for the Swiss tourism. It's really about driving traffic to Switzerland and to your community of businesses. What's the shift you've seen in products and services on offer from the Swiss tourism community to drive uptake, both in the business and leisure environment? And have you started to see an increase in this demand in the recent months with borders starting to reopen slowly?
Out of a global perspective, it's quite difficult to answer. As soon as we had here in Southeast Asia the shutdown, of course, there were a lot of shift of resources, of activities towards the European markets, which were still open and possible to travel. And we had last summer, as an example, about 70 to 90% of the overnights that we usually have in a normal year from the countries next by. So that's something that we shifted internally in regards of resources. We built new products in Switzerland. So we started, let's say, with leisure. Rainer already mentioned it. We made campaigns about hotel and bureau accommodation. So you got your own office in another city within Switzerland, so that you could go out of the lockdown. We are doing a lot of tourism for tourism initiatives, which is an HR initiative between different companies, because some of the companies in Switzerland, they drive still. They do quite a lot of business because they have a lot of domestic and short haul demand, and other businesses that are more for the long haul demand, they had a big change. So we could shift resources within our industry. Last autumn, we saw quite a big demand coming back. So as Rainer mentioned before, it goes very fast. As soon as it looks like that people can travel cross borders again, the demand is here. We had travel fairs that we did in Kuala Lumpur, where we had bookings where people did the full payment for trips that would have taken place right now. Another shift that we did in fall is to focus more on products and services that have a longer lead time. One example is destination weddings. So we build up all the network with destination planners, wedding planners in the region in Asia Pacific to get destination weddings to Switzerland. As well, we intensified all our incentive promotion to get incentives to Switzerland. And as an example, we just had last week, Amway confirmed a group of about 1,800 people coming to Switzerland in the second half of 2022, generating about 10,000 overnights in Switzerland alone.
That's really interesting. So I guess when it comes to, I'd like to turn this conversation over to Royston from the Working Capital. One of the things that we're hearing from both Ivan and Rainer is that Obviously, there is a shift in the way that people are traveling and why they're traveling, and there's definitely incentives which are coming through. But when it comes to the working capital in Singapore, one of the biggest things that you had in previous years as well was local businesses or international startups that were based at the working capital who would have quite a fair bit of international business travelers coming in. In the new world that the working capital is facing, how has that shifted, and what have you done as an organization to make things a bit more comfortable for your community and enabling them?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Mira. I think very quickly, we still see Singapore as a regional hub where businesses still want to continue setting up their offices here as the regional Asia Pacific potentially office. Definitely with COVID, what I would envision is business travel is going to be much shorter, more targeted, and travelers will want to maximize the value during that travel because there's only so many limited time, right? With quarantine back and forth, they need to maximize their value. So what we're actually getting in terms of inquiry from these companies and these travelers are that they want to know if they were to come into the space, can they extract more value? Can they meet up with more companies? Can they capitalize on my network of co-working other operators within the space? Who else can they do matchmaking? So I think where TWC comes in to support them is that these are my networks, these are my members, these are my current companies that are working within my space. And with your business model, with your target clients, these are your potential people that you can meet. And when they come in here, they can be like, okay, day one, I'm going to meet company A. Day two, I'm going to meet company B. And these are the things they want to get out of it. And we can really facilitate the entire interaction and discussion prior to them even coming into the country itself. So this is something that we're pivoting to support them.
Okay. And Ragulan, so I guess from a Zoom perspective, similar to what Royson's talking about trying to start conversations, Zoom has become synonymous with work from home and the COVID environment today. When you think about the future of what are some of the emerging trends that you're seeing coming from the Asia Pacific region specifically, and how do you think, when you think about the future of travel, those two worlds are going to collide?
Yeah, so there's a few topics here. And firstly, Raina, I've used that chat app at Four Seasons. It's amazing. I don't know how people just magically appear when you chat on that app. So big compliments to Four Seasons on that. But secondly, just in terms of what we call the future of work, what's happened is that people have had to work from home for an extended period, and companies have been forced to adopt tools, and behaviors have significantly changed. And what we see on the horizon is that people will come back in a hybrid manner. Now, one of the statistics that I saw was that only less than 1/10 of people want to come back to the office full time. Approximately half of the population want to come back in some sort of 2, 3, or 4 day a week scenario. And approximately 1/3 of people never want to come back to the office at all and want to work from home permanently, right? And so some of the behaviors that have changed is that, for example, when you are setting up a meeting before, having a Zoom link as part of a meeting was an afterthought. Most likely it'll be in person. And now at least one person in that meeting is going to say, hey, that's nice that you're meeting in person, but is there a Zoom link as well, right? So just the way that people meet has changed. I think the other behaviors that have changed in terms of business travel is that, and this is my favorite analogy, January 2020, I did 7 trips to KL back and forth, mostly day trips. Completely mind-boggling now, but a necessity to get business done just over a year ago, right? In the year before that, I did more than 300,000 miles. I bought credit, so don't worry, keeping the earth good. But completely not the way that we're going to travel again. And I think what will happen is that fundamentally, to build certain types of relationships, you do need to meet in person. I think it's an important part of doing business. It's an important part of our personal lives. But I think they're going to be more considered trips. I think the 1-day trip, the 2-day trips are going to happen less, and you're going to have more substantial business trips for 1 week or 2 weeks, which are less frequent. You may go once a quarter as opposed to every 2 weeks or every month. And what you can do over video conferencing will happen over video conferencing. So I think there's 2 aspects to it. One is how do companies prepare for this and enable their employees to do it, and I think the second part is what travel will look like for both business and leisure. And I think another thing that I see from the market speaking to people is is this sort of business leisure concept of like, okay, if I'm going to go through all the hassle of all the tests and everything else, then I'll go for a week or two for business, and then I also have a holiday. I know some people personally who have got the vaccine in Singapore are ready to do business, ready to go on a long business trip, 4 to 6 weeks across the Middle East and Europe. That are looking at a 2-week holiday plus 4 weeks of business and then coming back where they would have normally flown for a few days. So these are some of the changes we're seeing. I think the hybrid working model is here to stay. And every company is figuring out what that means for them. And we all have a part to play, I guess, in terms of whether it's hotels or co-working spaces or video conferencing.
So I guess Raina and Royston, when you think about the idea around hybrid work environments and even hybrid travel, how is it that I guess when you look at businesses or other brands in Asia, are there any businesses or brands that stand out in the way that they have changed their strategic direction to be able to accommodate for this hybrid work environment from a real estate as well as from a travel experience point of view?
The way I'd look at it, I don't think anybody has quite arrived at a sustainable scenario with the anticipation that certain patterns will stay in the long run. I definitely subscribe to the idea that people will travel differently, and yet I'm convinced we will see surprises about how quickly certain habits will come back, and yet the world will, in my view, particularly when it revolves around travel, look a little differently. Commercially, strategies clearly had to change through different geo sources, domestic markets, depending on however long this carries on, different demand patterns. So strategic adjustments there for sure. Operationally, again, a lot around tech and once more, I call it remote everything. I see across different businesses that is happening. And then an interesting part that I find, and again, I don't think anybody's quite there yet, certainly we're not, is around the development aspect of new properties through renovations. How do spaces function in the future? How do people interact with one another? What gives you the right traffic flow? How do you energize certain areas? So there's a lot of development around this right now, but I don't know that anybody has quite arrived at a conclusion thinking this is a firm direction forward.
Yeah, I guess from a corporate real estate point of view, COVID has unfortunately derailed a lot of corporate real estate strategies, forcing companies to rethink, relook at how people, where they work and how they work. I think what we will see going forward is that companies will start to potentially downsize their footprint within the CBD area. They will start to go outside, decentralize, set up satellite offices, because I think with technology and digitalization, it has proven that people can work from anywhere, essentially anywhere and everywhere. I think not only that, companies are, because of today's challenging climate, they are reviewing their bottom lines in terms of expenditure on CapEx, OpEx. So they will look at potentially flexible models for their real estate, downsizing, again, looking at shorter term obligations, because until they have better visibility on their business, better stability of the entire economy, a lot of corporates will not be able to sort of commit longer term lease obligations with landlords and space. So I think that's something that is actually at the back of most of the companies now, hence looking for various options, flexibility going forward.
It must be a pretty, I mean, when you think about partnerships in the new era of business travel, it used to be that with business travel that the partnerships were largely only with hotels or with flights or rental car companies. But what we're almost starting to see now is that when people are traveling, or even when large organizations are set up in a specific country, they're actually starting to give passes to co-working spaces to have people fan out into different locations. so that there is safer alternatives? Do you think that there is going to be a change in the partnership model that you're going to be experiencing when it comes to the future of business travel?
So interestingly, you say that I'm actually in discussion with Singapore Airlines to look at partnership. I think one thing we have found, unfortunately, business travel is not possible at this point of time. We do have, or there is a market of people having a lot of miles like Rak, who wants to utilize it. So actually, we're opening up the doors to allow people to utilize their miles within our campus to buy our products. But in the longer term, to your point, Mira, I think we also want to tap into the business travels that SIA, KrisFlyer, Star Alliances have, which eventually, when the travel starts to reopen, people will be looking at, again, buying tickets, and maybe through their network, they'll be looking at co-working space potentially when they come into the country for the business travel. So these are things that are sort of evolving in terms of our partner strategy.
Okay. There's a question that's popped out in our Q&A for our speakers. So just based off the topic that we've been discussing, based on the recent news about 70, and this was from the Straits Times this morning and last night, based on the recent news about 75% of employees can return to the office in Singapore. Do you believe things will slowly go back to as before, with people working full-time at offices? And maybe even here to Raglan, what exactly is it that you foresee is going to happen? But maybe we'll start with Rags. Would you like to kick off the conversation here?
Look, I think there's an element of, I was in the city just earlier, it was actually pretty busy. I was saying to a friend that it looks like almost pre-COVID. And, but, you know, I think there's some elements, people have been at home for very extended periods of time, sometimes with family. And I know my wife is back, for example, back in the office, just maybe she's sick of me, maybe she just wants to get back to the office. You know, so there's an element of going back. But having said that, I think the way that you go back to the office is going to change. You're not necessarily there to do an 8 or 10-hour workday. You may go there for a part of the day, etc. Right? So definitely, I think there's a wanting to go back to some sort of normality, but I think we're going to meet somewhere in between. And I think the way that we go back is going to be interesting. I think from a co-working space, like we're doing a lot of work now with, you know, what in terms of like physical buildings. What do they look like? How do they need to be kitted out? It's a teleconferencing service, but we also have a lot of hardware partners, and they're fitting out, you know, rooms in buildings. You know, only a small percentage of most meeting rooms, for example, had video conferencing enabled. Now you need nearly every room to have it, for example, right? And also home devices as well. So I think there's an element of most of it will go back, but most companies are setting up and investing in a hybrid scenario. Some are leading it, actually. For example, from the Swiss angle, UBS and Credit Suisse are great Zoom customers and doing a lot of innovation around how they actually go back to the office and enable employees. And then there's going to be others that are a little bit slower that will be following over the next few years and watching what some of the more innovative companies are doing.
Raina, Ivan, any thoughts around this?
I'd agree. Yet again, I would say, though, that much of that would have happened even without this pandemic, but it's been triggered in a different fashion. And I would view it more in the context of the much quoted millennial workforce, the younger generations, clearly more and more tech jobs, more and more jobs that you can do from your laptop, as to where we were 10, 15, and 20 years ago. That requires greater flexibility, allows people to work from wherever. And so I think we would have gone in this direction anyway. It challenged everybody now to react a lot more quickly to see where it goes. From a hospitality perspective, we, again, for a number of years have considered that we're 24-hour operations, we're hubs in communities. We can offer a lot more services than just putting heads in beds and serving a hot cup of coffee. So there will be a greater degree of flexibility. And yet it will very much depend on the line of business, the industry that you're in. And I believe, like in so many aspects of life, it's your choice. It's a much broader range of offerings and ways to live your life and go about your job. And I believe that we will relatively quickly find this equilibrium, but until then, the pendulum will swing in all sorts of directions.
Mm. Ivan?
I can only agree to what Rainer said at the moment. It really depends on in which business you are in. I believe that it will be quite difficult for big associations to come together on a global scale in the midterm. There will be a much more hybrid version of events. Smaller chapters that are meeting together on a global platform. So that's definitely something that is going to happen. In regards of traveling and flying, I also believe that trips will be tendently longer than what it used to be, with possibilities to have an office at a certain destination, a shared office space that you use for a week or two, and spend time there. So this is really what I can see. Leisure came before the pandemic already up as a trend, and we see also there that this trend will continue and will be even stronger.
There's another question that's come through again around, now around business travel. And this is a bit more of a prediction. For business travel, how will the recovery look like? And do you expect a long recovery ahead? So maybe I could go to Ivan here, just based off the work that you've been doing, especially with your community. What are your thoughts? And also then for the rest of our speakers, what are your thoughts around Asia? So maybe we'll start with Ivan first.
We believe the business travel to pre-COVID levels will only be back at about 2025 from Asia. Europe will recover much faster. What we also need to take in consideration is the wealth that is around it. The economy is actually not doing that badly. There is a lot of more businesses popping up. As the example in Singapore, it's amazing what has been done in the last 1.5 years in regards of new business development, and so there is an increase of the overall cake. So even though that some parts will be more thoughtful, overall I think the business travel will be bigger than it was pre-COVID in a few years.
Okay. To the rest of our panel, any thoughts on what you think the recovery is going to look like around business travel?
Once more, I would say it will differ greatly from destination to destination. And rather than predicting, if we just look at China, I can share with you that in cities like Shenzhen, Guangzhou, in fact, Q4 of 2020, in aggregate, business travel exceeded the numbers of 2018.
Okay. When it comes to one of the next questions that's just come through is customer service in travel. And I think that this may be something that Rags and Rainer, you might want to speak to. What does customer service in travel find? Where do you see it going, and what's the new shift that we're going to see when it comes to the new customer experience, be it digital or even in terms of feedback or support services that we're going to see in the future using technology and even an upgrade from the current transformation that you're starting to see at the Four Seasons, for example?
Rags, you want to?
Sorry, go for it, Rainer.
No, please.
Well, I mean, from our perspective, I think we will see that video becomes pervasive everywhere, right? And so, for example, earlier this week, we released what we call an SDK, so businesses can build Zoom into their applications. And often this is used for customer-facing applications, not in travel per se, but HSBC, for example, uses to build For mortgage processing, to do an application, you can meet with someone face to face, right? So I think we're going to see a lot of innovation around replacing perhaps front desks experiences, things that were face to face with video. And I think there's some smart companies that are going to, you've already got the chat app, for example, Raina, and I expect that there'll be other innovations around video and audio as well that this will instigate.
You just mentioned it, audio. There is much talk around voice and less the need to type, even on devices that are being used today. And that, again, in China, but in many other parts of particularly Asia, that is more your mobile phone than a desktop or a laptop. So we clearly have seen that trend of interacting through your mobile device for a number of years, and that's not something we anticipate will stop anytime soon. Having said that, and again, if we look at whatever post-pandemic means, ultimately, we know that people want to get together, that they want to be social, that they want to find safe ways to connect, to hang out together, and hybrid models, in my view, will continue to be there. You will have the flexibility and the freedom to interact in any which way you want. But ultimately, it's, for most people, I think, more fun if they can hang out together and have in-person interactions.
I've certainly done a few of these like internal sales kickoff events or conferences, which normally in the tech industry mean that you get together globally for 3-4 days in whichever city can hold that many of you. And it's definitely, as much as I love my product, it's definitely not as much fun as meeting in person. You do get a lot of the content, but you don't get to build those relationships after hours outside of the content, which is where the real magic happens. And that doesn't need to happen necessarily all the time, but you still need that periodic, whether it's every 6 months or every year, where you're getting together as a team. And I think there's definitely a need for people to meet in person still.
Absolutely. Another question which has come through, and this is a phrase that I'm sure many of us have experienced several times in the past couple of months, digital transformation. Will this phase, or based off your experiences, will this phase accelerate digital transformation at large travel companies? So I guess when we're looking at hospitality, airlines, and anything within the travel experience space, what are your thoughts around that? Raina, Ivan, Rags?
Mira, yeah. Massive change. And again, that's something that's been core and center to our industry for a number of years. And as I mentioned earlier, we see that from the moment where people browse at home to think about destinations, to the way they inquire as to what they can do where at what time of the year, to integrated ways of booking travel, and in essence, this one-stop shopping experience, to, after a long, whatever long distance flight, not having to see and say hello to anybody, which maybe the next morning you would really appreciate, but not in the middle of the night. So all across, when we look at our travel partners, from tour operators, travel agents, to the experience within hotels, the amount of systems that have to speak to one another in order to create a successful hotel experience today, both for our customers and for our employees, to enable them to do their work effectively and frankly to have fun as well, which is essential in being the absolute people business and having individuals who truly care, and that has to come across as they interact with customers. So the transformation is through every part of what we do and the experience, if that answers the question at all.
Yes, it does. I mean, let's go to Royson for a minute here. I mean, when it comes to the future of work, the working capital has always been known for, and a lot of co-working spaces around the globe have been known for creating the environment to bring different people together to allow for collaboration and diversity in the way that different perspectives are shared. When you look at the industry that you're in, how has digital transformation shifted or enabled folks like the working capital to move ahead?
I think what we see is like a hybrid model. So you see real estate footprints more scattered across each individual companies. You see potentially their sales team within a co-working space. You have the back-end support in their real estate office. A lot of hybrid model. So with that digital transformation and adoption of technology, they can still interact, but at the same time be in the right place at the right time, interacting with the right people. So yes, a lot of flexibility in the model, in the way they're working. Even for us to cater for that within the co-working space, we need to ensure there's stable Wi-Fi. You see fintech companies taking our space and wanting additional IT support like UPS, uninterrupted power supply and all that. So we have to shift as well to support the entire change.
Hey, thank you. When it comes to, and Ivan, maybe this is more of a question for you and for Rainer as well. Do you expect, and this is around travel, do you expect that in the future only vaccinated people will be able to travel? And so only airlines and even hotels might not accept people without a vaccine pass?
I think at this moment, it's the most likely scenario that airlines will ask for a vaccination, to have a vaccination passport. IATA is there quite advanced, but there's about 20 products at the moment out there that are trying to do the same thing. There will be certain hotels which will oblige or they will ask for a vaccination passport that is international valid to give this safe atmosphere for its clients. So at this moment, I believe that's how it will go rather than single activities with travel bubbles, etc. Whether it's I don't think that individual country by country solution will make it through. I think it will be more on a global and globally accepted way. There could be maybe 3 or 4 different standards, but that they accept each other. That's at the moment the most likely scenario to travel again freely without quarantine.
I believe there are a few companies that have started down that path, Israel being one of them, and others working on it. Clearly, governments seem to struggle, though, in many cases for ethical reasons, particularly during times when lack of availability of vaccination is still a key issue, and how we would work with preferential treatment for those that can, that have, versus those that don't. So from a legal and regulatory perspective, there are clearly hurdles to be overcome. On the other hand, with every month, the desperation levels go up by a number of governments as to how travel could work again. And right now, sitting here today, I'd agree with Ivan that I think some of these scenarios will be in place, but it has to work on a broad level, whether these are digital passports, how do we make sure they can't be faked? And there is still a lot to figure out in the context for this to really work. And I would be surprised if it happens in the near term, but clearly there are efforts underway to try and accelerate certain openings in the context.
Thank you. I guess since we're like coming towards the end of our panel, one of the key topics that we also wanted to talk about today was around the area of sustainability. Sustainability in the travel industry is pretty interesting at the moment. And concerning the travel crunch, there is a concern around cost savings, driving profitability. and where sustainability could potentially play a role. Ivan, I know that this is something that Swiss tourism, some of the topics that you've discussed before. What is happening when it comes to this area of focus, and how do you see it growing in light of COVID?
For Switzerland, sustainability is a key success factor. I mean, why are you going to Switzerland? Because of the car-free villages, the crystal clear air, the water that you can drink from every fountain, the local sourced food, etc. That's at the end the quintessence of Switzerland, and people are ready to pay a certain premium for this, and this will come more and more. The people will say, okay, I pay for having a footprint, or I choose a destination because it is sustainable. So we just announced yesterday a partnership with 3 different organizations globally: the Global Destination Sustainability Index, the Global Sustainability Tourism Council, as well as the Adventure Travel Trade Association, to really build up content, but also build up products that work, that are more sustainable. Here in Southeast Asia, as an example, we created about 10 different sustainable itineraries through Switzerland, being it for small groups on the train with luggage transport from hotel to hotel, etc., that we can roll out as soon as borders are opening again, and travel will be possible. So for us, it's the base for everything that we are doing. And as I mentioned, it's also the possibility to Switzerland will not be able to differentiate in regards of being the cheapest, but if we are the best and the best sustainable country, we definitely have key success factor there.
And Rainer, you were speaking just now about some of the sustainability initiatives, and I know this is a topic that's close to you as well. What are some of the new developments that you're seeing with the Four Seasons, as well as the conversations you've been having?
Very, frankly, personal passion of mine, but just to step back for a moment, there has been discussions around sustainability and environmental impact for many, many years. But I think to this point, we've seen that real progress only happens if A, there is regulatory and political pressure, and or B, it becomes commercially sustainable to be environmentally sustainable, and C, clearly by consumer pressure and the customers asking for it. What we've also identified is that the realization or the value that people see in sustainability, and Ivan just spoke to it, it comes more at the high priced end, comes more on the luxury end, and with a traveler who has choices. But for us, given your question, Four Seasons, it's absolutely essential to where we see our future. And again, in many instances, it's become commercially interesting as already in order for us to really push this forward a little more strongly with various ownership partners in different parts of the world. To be a bit more concrete, we have, over the last 2 years, eliminated in most of our resorts, and I speak for Asia here for a moment, most of our resorts and city properties, the single-use plastic bottles. We've installed bottling plants, energy-efficient bottling plants in most of the locations. Aside from that, we're piloting and working with a number of partners again on reducing food waste, when you consider that today, globally, 1/3 of all the food that is being produced goes to waste, never reaches any consumer. If we could just reduce that waste by 25%, that would lead to feeding, I know it's always easier said than done from a distribution perspective, but we could feed another 800 million people around the globe. So the big numbers are very convincing. It needs the individual efforts. We have very involved and integrated teams working on that because, again, we can globally direct a lot. Ultimately, it's the efforts on the ground. And if I use once more an example in Landa Giravao, and my background here, we have worked on putting back reefs, on wildlife conservation, on minimizing the environmental impact that every traveler brings with them, customers going out in boats, learning about the oceans and plastic impact and what have you. So it's very much a local effort, globally driven. We're very focused on it. We're making, even with that, frankly, and admittedly, baby steps. And yet I see that as one of the key challenges for us as an industry over the next decade.
Okay. Before we go into the sustainability conversation, before we wrap on the sustainability conversation, Royston, I know that when it comes to the working capital, sustainability is a key area of focus for you as well, even with the way that the business looks at heritage locations. Can you tell us a little bit about what you're doing or what you're seeing when it comes to co-working, real estate, and some of your new ventures around sustainability?
Sure. So for us, constantly we're providing that flexible model for corporates, and sometimes on a very short-term obligation. So it could be a 3 months project, or companies coming in taking a loan, taking a lease for 3 months, and after 3 months we need to actually reconfigure the space again for another corporate to come in. What I've actually done recently is to adopt a furniture leasing model instead, to create the flexibility for us. So instead of buying the furniture, holding up for a long term, we're looking at a more leasing model, more like asset-light model, where we, again, it caters for the market for the flexibility. So that's our new partnership with some of the furniture leasing companies. It sort of also contribute back into the circular economy, where we do see some certain amount of wastage of furniture within the big corporates. So we are actually taking it in and then reusing, refurbish them, and then utilizing it on a lower rate.
Okay, it's good to know. The circular economy is now starting to enter, some other non-alternative business types. So I guess we'll go back into the Q&A. We've had a couple more questions come up. Before we go back to Zoom, there is a question that's been out there around the World Economic Forum, which is still scheduled for August in Singapore. Unfortunately, I don't know if we can give you an update about the event, though I think Chris from Swiss Tram Singapore, you might be able to give us some perspective around what the Swiss Chamber of Commerce is actually doing with the WEF event. But also to our speakers, when you think about this event, it is bringing together some of the key leaders from around the world. And do you think that this will be a benchmark of sorts for reopening of business-specific travel? So before we go into benchmarking, Chris, would you like to provide us with some perspective?
Yes, we from the board of the Swiss Chamber of Commerce in Singapore, we are in constant dialogue with the organization committee of the World Economic Forum. Since it has been announced publicly that this year it will happen in Singapore instead of Switzerland. So at this stage, it is still planned to go ahead. As you might know, it was planned for May, then it was pushed back to August now. And that is still the plan from the information that we have. On the whole organization, on how and what is the impact on safety to ensure the safety and all the participants, whether they need to quarantine, what kind of locations will they able to go, and so on and so on. All these questions, unfortunately, we do not have any insights. We know that there is a planning committee with a strong agency also based in Singapore, trying to put together a full protocol for all the participants that are planned to come from different countries around the world. But to what extent this will be a future norm is a bit unclear, because it is not clear how this will look like. But what we know today, the discussion is ongoing and the plans are ongoing. And then I guess it's also a matter of the Singapore government then to to make that decision on whether this can happen.
Okay, thank you. And so I guess to our speakers, and maybe we'll start with Ivan. When it comes to the reopening, when you look at the World Economic Forum as a benchmark for reopening of business travel, do you think it is, and how do you think that we should be looking at it?
It definitely has a symbolic character. Having such a prestigious event shows the beginning of the end of the situation that we currently have, because a half year or a year ago you wouldn't be able to do such an event. So it definitely has a symbolic character, and that's also why the Singapore Tourism Board is a very strong in the lead of trying to organize it. Now, unfortunately, with the in December, we were all much more convinced that we would be further now than we are actually, and so I think there is not a possibility to extend it one more time, and then we are soon in January again, where it's supposed to take place in Davos.
Raina, Rags, Royson, any thoughts on what this will mean? Do you think it'll be more about like all eyes on Singapore as almost like a bit of an experiment to see whether or not this would work?
In my view, it's a great opportunity for Singapore, certainly all eyes on the country. To what extent it leads the way, I'm afraid, will depend on how it will be facilitated at the time, to what extent it is a bubble event. And I don't know enough about it, but to what extent people roam about freely. And I would think whether it goes ahead and the success is largely dependent not just on Singapore, but on the countries of origin, if you will, or where the participants are coming from, the state of the pandemic that these countries are in. I guess now at an earlier time, it would be difficult for certain leaders to fly around the country while the population is being told you have to stay at home and can barely go to a restaurant. So again, I think there are broader considerations that need to be taken into account. If it's a full-fledged event, which I want to believe Singapore would be able to host, it could very much lead the way, but personally, I don't know enough at this stage as to what's going to happen or not.
Okay. Well, as we are coming up to the last minute of our panel, we have one question which is directed at Ragulan. What does Zoom really think about the future of corporate travel? And yeah, well, what do you think?
I'm guessing that everyone, would presume that in a video conferencing company, we'd think that it's going to zero. It's absolutely not the case. I don't think it's going back to 100% the way it was. And maybe with general market growth, we'll reach back to the same levels. But it's going to be somewhere between, I think, 50 and 100% of what it was. But one thing I will note is that from customers, we see demand for video and audio and collaboration technology and communication technology, which includes chat and many other tools, really anytime and anywhere they are. So, of course, we've seen that into our homes so far, but that will now move into, if we've got self-driving cars, in cars, or if we're going on aeroplanes, I think you're going to see Zoom and these sort of tools in aeroplanes. And I think the innovative hotels as well will play their part as well. Like if you can go to a hotel and you can plug in and automatically have a meeting room with a virtual background with a ready-to-go Zoom device or similar, I think it will definitely add to the guest experience. So I think that's the way corporate travel is going to transform. I think it's less a discussion about what the numbers are going to be, because honestly, it's anyone's guess. No one really knows. But I think for sure the impact of the digitization will be long lasting on the customer experience, the way that people actually travel, the expectations that people have when they actually get on a plane or go to another country.
That's great. Thank you. And thank you to our speakers today for being a part of our final session with the Swiss Cham around travel. I'd like to invite Chris Neff to probably just give some closing remarks just on our final webinar, as well as what we can expect for future Swiss Cham events. And thank you to our speakers as well for being a part of today's session.
Well, this trilogy of webinars on this very relevant topic of the new reality of travel has been a very exciting and also demanding journey. I think all of us try to, on a daily basis, understand what is changing, what is shifting, what is the impact on my industry or adjacent industries. And this is a constant challenge for us to stay up to date in order to plan our business properly, to do a proper forecast over the next 12 to 18 months. And I think that keeps us up on our toes on a very regular basis. So the objective of this webinar was that we are able to give information, insights from experts. I guess we're all aware that nobody knows exactly the predictions. And we have seen a lot of turns and twists in the last 12 months that probably none of us expected. I believe we all were anticipating that a year after the start of this, we would have this under control, which is unfortunately largely not the case in a lot of countries. So with this platform, I hope it was useful for our members, for our guests from other chambers to get opinions, to stimulate conversations, to expand our networks with colleagues. And we want to continue to do that. That's what we are there for. Our mission is to help businesses, to connect organizations and individuals. And we are doing this. We continue to do that in other forms. We start to do some physical events also soon. But as we now discussed, we know that going forward, also those physical events will have a hybrid component into it. We will have people that want to join a physical event also digitally. So we are also adjusting our event formats going forward for all our members. And we are using technology, obviously, to enable that. So I'm very thankful for all the experts that have shared their time, their experiences and opinions. And also thank you, Mira, for guiding us through this journey, connecting the dots of the various industries and the various opinions. It was an insightful and very challenging, but also rewarding journey. Thank you, everyone, and hope to see you soon in any other form, either digitally or physically, at any event or any other occasion. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, everyone, and have a pleasant evening, and we'll see you at the next Swiss Cham event.